thank you so much for being here. It's very exciting for both of us. Ned's not a big fan of crowds, I'm just going to warn you with that now. But my name is Shauna Coxsey, and this is my husband, Ned Feehally. And he wrote a book, which still blows my mind a little bit because Ned does not like attention. So writing the book was definitely something that we were both a little surprised by. But being here today, I think it feels a little bit more real now.
Yeah, well, we've seen it now. We flicked through it, and apparently it's there.
It was a long process to kind of get to the book actually being in our hands. Definitely more for you than myself. I think I was just the really harsh critic throughout the whole process, but we're still together at the end of it, so I feel like we did quite well. But a bit of history about where the book came from and kind of what your inspiration was. So you're one of the founders of Beastmaker, which is a wooden fingerboard training apparatus.
Yeah, wooden fingerboards. I mean, I imagine you probably all know what they are. Yeah, okay.
I don't really know where to go from there. But can you tell us why did you create a fingerboard? Like, what was the reason for it? So this was how long ago?
So Dan Varian and I, when we were students, it would have been 2006 or so, we decided that we wanted to fingerboard loads because it was cheaper than going to the climbing wall. And it worked really well with climbing outside, but all the fingerboards that were available were resin and sharp and not so nice, so we thought we can do a better job. So started making them. We
have the original, very first prototype of the Beastmaker, which looks incredibly similar to what they look like now. So they pretty much nailed it first time.
And then I trained on this one for years and years. Yeah, kind of horrible. Glad they've improved.
They look a little pretty now. But I think the only thing that's changed on the current ones to that one is the middle edge at the bottom, right?
Yeah, the world famous middle edge. Yeah.
We'll hear a bit more about the middle edge a little bit later on. Beastmaker is incredibly popular. It's kind of like the Hoover of the world, you know, like everyone talks about fingerboarding and they talk about Beastmakers, but why do you think they are so popular?
Well, I think going back to why we designed it in the first place, before these fingerboards came along, all the ones before that were a bit nasty or a bit kind of homemade, and it felt like we made something that was maybe a bit more comfortable to use, and we made using it maybe a little bit cooler. And they look
You're so cool.
Naturally. And they look all right as well, so you can have it up in your house and it doesn't look like a swirly bit of resin. So that's kind of why they became popular.
And you talk about training and not being at the climbing wall so much and kind of training more specifically. You are someone who trains more vigorously and rigorously than anyone I've ever met. Like, it's so regimented. But why train? Like, what's the point of training for climbing?
You make me sound like a barrel of laughs, didn't you? Training's really important for me because it means I enjoy climbing more. I get more out of climbing when I'm climbing better. So putting the hours in training means when I go climbing, it's more fun for me. So I think
improve.
Yeah, I want to get better. For me, climbing, the enjoyment in climbing is all about the progress and seeing gains. And I think that's why people get into training, because they want to see progress and see themselves improve over time.
And then, obviously, you trained specifically for yourself for so long, but you had so much knowledge around training. And is that why you wrote a book? Like, what was the reason for writing a book about training for climbing?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it was because you pestered me enough to do it. But before that, I felt like I'd spent quite a long time training, fiddling around with ideas and chatting to a lot of good people that we know that climb and train. And it felt like there was a lot of info there, and I felt like I could present that to people in a way that was digestible and usable, because loads of the training information in the world is kind of a bit dry and a bit dull. So I wanted it to be approachable and kind of easy to use for normal folk.
For context, Ned loves to read like articles about really specific, boring training stuff, not just for climbing, but everything. I'm a professional climber as well, and I do not like to do that. So I've been the recipient of him making things very digestible for the last 10 years. So when Ned suggested the idea about maybe writing a book, I was like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense, because people will be able to kind of get the snippets out of your head that I've been benefiting from for so long. But training in the climbing world kind of used to be seen quite differently. Like the perceptions of training have changed over the years, would you say?
Yeah, I remember when I was young, I started climbing as a 7-year-old or so in the 90s, and people just didn't train. I mean, the other professional climber did, but generally people didn't train at all, and it was almost, you kind of got laughed at for thinking about it. If you did any more than a few pull-ups, then you get laughed at for being weird. Whereas further down the line, I mean, now look at all the climbing boards we've got, all the facilities we've got, training's become totally normal for people and accepted, and well, I mean, you don't get laughed at. People pay to do it now, don't they?
People buy a book about it.
People buy books about it. They buy bits of wood to hang off. It's just the market's changed over the years, and climbing's changed so much that now there is a space for more training info, I think.
Yeah. With Wolfgang and the likes of him kind of introducing the idea of training to the climbing world, you know, it was almost seen that the pro climbers train and it's like an elite thing that you do. And as time's gone on, it's become much more normal for all climbers to train, like anyone who wants to improve. Have you found that in your climbing, obviously you've not been kind of as good as you are for your whole career, but you're very specific at training for what you want. Has your climbing and your training changed over the years and become more specific?
Yeah, well, I think that, again, when I started, no one trained, really, or very few people. So training for me sort of developed as I have. The better I've got, the more I've understood about training and the more I've kind of added stuff to my training. So I think almost the more you improve, the more you realise what you have to work on. So there's always space for adding more things to work and more things to improve upon.
And I guess like more research going into it and more people training, and you discuss training with so many different elite climbers, and we've both been lucky enough to train and climb with some of the world's best. And we saw in the film there, comparing Alex Megos to Wolfgang and how differently they train, and how kind of Wolfgang was a pioneer of training, and now Alex is probably someone who is a more obsessed with training than you, maybe even, which is quite impressive.
I mean, I think Alex enjoys training as much as climbing, really, but we'll see about that in a minute.
Exactly.
But one thing you do notice is for some reason he used to train in their underpants, and we don't seem to anymore.
Are you still training in your underpants?
Yeah, sometimes.
In fact, I've actually seen you do a bouldering and flying in your underpants because you were too hot. Which the old gentleman that walked around the corner was not impressed with when Ned was on this mantle. But we don't need to talk about that. Speaking of Alex, who is a good friend of both of ours, Alex Megos, he's someone who you've discussed training with so much, and I've been partial to some of those conversations. Usually I just switch off, admittedly, but we're going to hear from Alex because you actually asked him to contribute to the book. So he couldn't be here today, but he's kindly recorded some questions for us. So we'll hear from Alex now.
My name is Alex Megos, and I'm a professional rock climber from Germany. So basically I fall off half the time. I'm professional at falling off. Fall off 99% of the time and get excited when I climb like a little 7-meter high route. I am currently in Spain, in Girona, and trying one of those 7-meter high routes from Will Bosey that he left here last March. Wow, because I have trained with Ned quite a few times over the last 5 or 6 years, and I've seen that he's got lots of knowledge in training, and he's got a very analytic approach to it, which obviously, as a German, I love that. He writes everything down and everything seems to be neat and tidy, and that is always a plus. Felt like that's a good approach to training because the scientific approach just doesn't work for everybody, I feel like. So even if the science says so, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll make people also stronger. But the practical approach of trying certain things out and see what works and what doesn't always seemed to be appealing. And then he wrote a book, and that seemed like a good idea for people to get stronger. My contribution to the book was I gave him some amazing pictures I took in his old cellar where he is trying hard with loads of weights on small edges. Amazing pictures. And then I gave him some semi-good pictures, phone pictures of me taping my fingers, because that's the only way I can climb, and I feel like that's also the only way other people can climb. Well, at least people who have got skin issues all the time like I do. No, training for me is very important. I really enjoy training. I not only to get stronger for outdoor projects, but I just enjoy training in general. I mean, that's why I came over to Sheffield so many times in winter. Definitely not because it's lovely, just because I enjoyed the training scene, and I really enjoyed climbing on boards with lots of strong people 3 times a day. And I do not train all the time when I'm, for example, now outside on a project, and then I try to focus on climbing hard and try to turn down the training a little bit, because usually training loads and trying to climb hard doesn't work at the same time. But I'm always trying to find a good balance between training and outside climbing. I think training can be important also for the average climber and for all climbers if they want to achieve certain goals out of, like on rock. I feel like climbing outside will eventually also make you stronger, especially if you climb outside on rock loads, but the average person doesn't have time to go outside climbing 7 days a week. So if they are planning on going, for a vacation to Spain or the lovely Franken Europe, and they want to send their first 7A, 8A, 9A, who knows, then I feel like training is a good way to achieve a certain level for you to be able to perform outside on rock however you want to perform. It always depends whether you count plastic climbing or climbing on indoors also as training. I feel like very often for me that is training, just because I don't climb on plastic, I only climb on wood. And whenever I climb indoors, it's on wood. So that means it is training. So in general, I would say my balance, I am aiming for 50-50. So 50% of my time I'm training and the other 50% of my time I'm outside climbing. But it varies a lot from year to year. And I think anywhere between 50-50 or maybe even 70-30 is fine. So there are years definitely where I focus much more on training than on climbing. And then sometimes it is the other way around, where I focus much more on outside climbing than on training. Just do something. I think the one thing you can do is just do something. If you're asking yourself, what can I train? Just do something. There are very few cases where any training would not help anymore, And if you don't know what to do, try to hang on the Beastmaker middle edge for a minute. If you do that, then let me know and I'll give you the next exercise.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the Kendal Mountain YouTube channel to watch the full session featuring Shauna Coxsey and Ned Feehally. You can now watch it on the Kendal Mountain player, and you can also have access to a free 3-day trial where just at the click of a button, you can have hundreds of hours of adventure content. For more information, click the link in the description below.